They found a camera in a pawn shop. The last photos were something no one could believe. The smell was the first thing that hit you. Not the pawn shop smell. The one Leo had grown so accustomed to it was practically a part of his own Skinner, sour cocktail of dust, desperation, and pines. This was different. It was the scent of a life sealed away. A faint, almost imperceptible perfume of lavender and old leather, trapped inside a canvas camera bag that had been sitting in a plastic bin of unclaimed junk for God knows how long. Leo's fingers, stained with the grime of 1,000 other forgotten treasures, closed around the bag. It was heavier than it looked. He hauled it onto the cluttered glass countertop, the thud muffled by a layer of unsorted watches and tarnished silver rings. The bin was from a storage unit auction, a blind lot he'd bought for $50 on a whim, hoping for a hidden gem, and expecting, as usual, nothing but broken electronics and moth-eaten clothes. The bag itself was a relic, a faded olive green with cracked leather straps. He fumbled with the rusted brass buckle, his breath catching in the dry, stale air of the shop. A fine powder of rust flaked onto the counter. When the clasp finally gave way, the scent bloomed, stronger now. Lavender, yes, but something else, too. Something metallic and vaguely chemical, like a darkroom dot inside. Nestled in a bed of worn navy blue velvet was the camera, a vintage Minolta X700. It was beautiful, not just well-preserved, but loved. The black metal body was cool and solid in his hands. The edges worn to a soft, silvery sheen from the constant touch of its owner. The lens was clean, the focus ring turned with a smooth, hydraulic glide that spoke of quality and care. This wasn't junk. This was someone's heart. He felt a familiar pang, a ghost of the man he used to be. The man who lived and breathed through a viewfinder, who believed a single frame could hold the weight of a soul. That man was long dead, buried under a mountain of debt and regret. Now, he was just Leo, the curator of broken dreams, the man who weighed people's memories in grams of gold. He checked the back. The film rewind crank was flush. There was a roll inside. A tiny, almost manic spark of curiosity flickered in the deadened space of his chest. It was a dangerous feeling. Curiosity had cost him everything once before. He should just put the camera in the display case, slap $100 price tag on it, and wait for some hipster to come along and buy a piece of analog authenticity. It was the smart thing to do. The safe thing. He didn't do the safe thing. He took the camera into the back room, a space that was part workshop, part sad little apartment. The air here was thick with the smell of soda and instant coffee. He pulled the blackout curtain across the door, plunging the room into a familiar, comforting gloom, punctuated only by the dim red glow of a safe light he hadn't turned off. In years, his hands moved with an old, muscle-deep memory, his fingers finding the rewind button on the camera's base. He turned the crank, the soft worry sound echoing in the silence. It was a sound from another life, a life of chasing headlines and deadlines, of adrenaline and the acrid smell of tear gas. The worry stopped. The film was rewound. He popped the back open. A Kodak Gold 200 canister, 36 exposures. Standard. Cheap. The kind of film you used for birthdays and vacations, not for art. He had the chemicals. Old, but they'd probably still work. Developing film was like riding a bicycle that could, if you weren't careful, break your heart. The process was a ritual, a meditation. The darkness, the precise measurements of the developer. The stop bath, the fixer, the gentle agitation of the tank, the water running, the quiet count in his head. For a half hour, he wasn't Leo the pawnbroker. He was Leo the photographer. He was home. He hung the wet, glistening ribbon of celluloid up to dry, securing it with a clothespin. He was patient. He made coffee, the bitter steam fogging up the small window that looked out onto a brick wall. He smoked a cigarette, the smoke mingling with the chemical temps in the air. He didn't let himself look, not yet. Hope, even a sliver of it, was a luxury he couldn't afford. When the film was finally dry, he carried it to the light table, his hands trembling just slightly. He switched on the light, and the long, amber strip glowed. He picked up his loupe, the small magnifier that had once been his third eye, and leaned in. The first few frames were what he expected. Blurry shots of a cat, a half-eaten piece of cake, on a floral plate, a sun-drenched shot of a public park, the trees heavy with summer leaves. They were snapshots, simple and artless. The artifacts of a normal life. He kept scrolling down the strip. Frame 12, a woman's face, laughing. She was beautiful, but not in a polished, perfect way. Her smile was wide and a little crooked, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Freckles were scattered across her nose. She was looking at the person holding the camera, and her expression was one of pure, unadulterated joy, love. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. It was too intimate. He was an intruder. Frame 13. The same woman, now with a man. He had his arm around her, pulling her close. He was handsome, conventionally so. Sharp jaw, perfect teeth, expensive-looking watch glinting on his wrist. He was smiling too, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were fixed on her, and there was an intensity in them, a possessiveness that made the hairs on Leo's arms stand up. The background was a waterfront, a city skyline hazy in the distance. Frame 14, 15, 16. More shots of the couple, kissing on a bench, feeding pigeons. The woman, Elarahi, decided to call her Elara, seemed to glow. The man, Julian, seemed to be performing. Every pose was perfect. Every smile, a little too practiced. He looked like a man from a magazine ad, selling a life of effortless wealth and happiness. Leo kept moving the film strip. He was getting near the end of the roll. The light in the photos began to change, the warm afternoon sun giving way to the cool, flat light of dusk. Frame 31. They were in a different location, a room. The lighting was harsh, artificial. Elara was still smiling, but it was strained now. A polite smile, the kind you wear when you're uncomfortable but don't want to make a scene. She was holding a glass of wine. Julian stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. His grip looked tight, too tight. His knuckles were white. Frame 32. A close-up on Ilara's face. The smile was gone. Her eyes were wide, darting slightly to the side, just out of frame. There was a flicker of fear there, a question. The background was out of focus, but he could make out the corner of a heavy, ornate wooden desk. Frame 33. The composition was messy, tilted, as if the camera had been grabbed in a hurry. It was a shot of Julian's face. He wasn't smiling anymore. His expression was cold, contemptuous. His mouth was a thin, hard line. He was speaking, his face contorted in a silent snarl. The photo was a mask torn away, revealing something ugly and violent underneath. Leo's heart was pounding now, a frantic drum against his ribs. The chemical smell in the room felt suffocating. He moved the strip to the next frame, frame 34. It was blurry, a chaotic swirl of motion, a flash of fabric, the dark wood of the desk, a pale streak that might have been a hand. It was a photo of a struggle, a moment of violence, captured by accident. He swallowed, his throat dry. One more frame. He knew he shouldn't look. He knew. This was the precipice, the edge of the abyss he'd spent a decade crawling away from, but he couldn't stop. His fingers, slick with sweat, nudged the film strip one last time. Frame 35. The world stopped. The air left his lungs in a silent rush. It was her, Elara, a tight, suffocating close-up of her face. The camera must have been inches from her. Her mouth was open in a scream that the photograph had stolen. Her lips pulled back from her teeth. Her eyes, dear God, her eyes. They were wide, with a terror so absolute, so profound, it felt like it was burning a hole through the celluloid. It wasn't just fear. It was the chilling, final certainty of death. The knowledge that there was no escape. But that wasn't the most horrific part, reflected in the stark, black pools of her pupils. Distorted by the curve of her cornea, was a tiny, clear image, a reflection of the person she was looking at. The person holding the camera, it was Julian, and he was smiling. A calm, serene, almost beatific smile as he watched her die. Leo recoiled from the light table, as if he'd been electrocuted. He stumbled backward, knocking over a stool with a clatter that shattered the unholy silence of the room. He slammed into the wall, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. He couldn't get the image out of his head. The scream, the terror, the reflection. He had seen death before. He had photographed war, famine, the aftermath of disasters. He had seen bodies. He had seen grief. He had seen violence. But he had never seen this. He had never seen the face of a victim in the final terrible second of her life, and in her eyes, the face of her killer. Relishing the moment, the photograph wasn't just a picture. It was a testimony. It was a soul's last cry, trapped in silver halide. He slid down the wall, his legs giving out, and sat heavily on the floor. The red safe light painted the room in the color of blood. He stared at the glowing strip of film on the light table, at that one, final monstrous frame. The pawnshop, his sanctuary of forgotten things, suddenly felt like a tomb. And he, the keeper of those things, had just unearthed a ghost that wouldn't just haunt him. It would demand justice, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the price of that justice would be more than he could bear to pay. He had run from a moment like this once before, and the guilt had hollowed him out. Now, another one had landed on his doorstep, wrapped in the scent of lavender and death. The cliffhanger wasn't just on the film, it was his life. What would he do? The silence of the back room offered no answers, only the deafening echo of a silent scream. He was trapped. The last photo wasn't just an image, it was a summons. And it had his name on it. He stayed on the floor for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones, the red light bleeding over everything. The world outside, with its traffic and its sirens and its ordinary oblivious life, felt a million miles away. Here, in this room, there was only the photograph, only Ella Ray's eyes. He had stumbled into the last reel of someone else's horror movie, and the credits weren't going to roll. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of his. And it was going to destroy him. He could feel it in the marrow of his bones. The photo was a curse, a contagion, and he was infected. He closed his eyes, but the image was burned. Onto the back of his eyelids, the screaming woman, and the smiling monster reflected in her dying gaze. Leo didn't sleep. How could he? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Frame 35. He spent the night chain-smoking in the back room. The strip of negatives laid out on the light table, like a sacred terrible text. By dawn, the small room was a grey haze of smoke, and the ashtray was overflowing. He felt brittle, frayed, a wire pulled to taut. The man he had been for the last 10 years, the cynical, detached pawnbroker, the ghost, haunting the aisles of his own life, had been exorcised by a single frame of film. In his place was someone he didn't recognize. Someone terrified, but also angry, a cold, deep anger that was slowly burning through the fog of his apathy. He was Leo Koval. He used to be a name, a byline under photos that made people uncomfortable, photos that showed the ugly truths people preferred to ignore. He'd been in war zones where the air tasted of cordite and fear. He'd documented famines where mothers with hollow eyes offered him their skeletal babies, begging him to show the world their suffering. He had a knack for being in the wrong place at the right time, for capturing the one image that told the entire devastating story. His camera was his shield, the lens a barrier between him and the horrors he witnessed. It allowed him to be present but not involved, a spectator to suffering. That shield had shattered in Sarajevo, a marketplace bombing. He was there, right there, adjusting his f-stop when the shell hit. The aftermath was a Bosch painting brought to life. Carnage and chaos. He did his job. He shot frame after frame, his motor drive worry, capturing the blood on the cobblestones, the dazed survivors, the weeping parents. And then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, pinned under a collapsed fruit stand. She was alive. Her eyes, wide and blue, and full of dust, found his. She wasn't crying. She was just looking at him, her small hand reaching out, and he just kept shooting. He framed the shot, the rule of thirds, the leading lines of the debris all pointing to her outstretched hand. A perfect composition. A prize-winning photo. He got the shot. He didn't take her hand. By the time the medics got to her, she was gone. The photo won him the award he'd always coveted. It also broke him. He could never look through a lens again without seeing that little girl's eyes, without feeling the weight of her hand that he never took. So he ran, he disappeared. He traded his press pass for a business license and buried himself here, in this mausoleum of second-hand sorrows. Convinced he deserved no better. Now, another pair of eyes was staring back at him from the light table. Ilara's eyes, and they were asking the same question. Will you help me? He had to know who she was. He had to give her a name beyond the one he'd invented. He started with the camera bag. He turned it inside out, running his fingers along every seam. Tucked into a small, zippered side pocket, his fingers brushed against a small, stiff rectangle. A library card. The plastic was worn, the photo faded, but it was her. The crooked smile was unmistakable. Ilara Vance. The name was real. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. The address was local, a street just a few miles away. And who was Julian? The man in the photos, the monster in her eyes. He was handsome, well-dressed, confident. The watch on his wrist in frame 13, Leo leaned over the negative with his loupe, squinting. It was a Patek Philippe, a watch that cost more than his entire shop. This wasn't just some guy. This was money, old money, or new money with an ego. People with that kind of money didn't just disappear. They erased them. A quick search on the shop's ancient wheezing computer confirmed his fears. Julian Croft. The name hit the search engine and exploded. He was a titan of industry, a real estate mogul, a celebrated philanthropist. His face was plastered across the society pages, shaking hands with the mayor. Dedicating the new wing of a children's hospital, his arm around his beautiful, elegant wife. The word landed like a punch to the gut. There were dozens of articles, praising his generosity, his vision, his commitment to the city. He was untouchable. A saint in a bespoke suit. Leo's blood ran cold. This was why the police would have dismissed it. This was why no one had reported Ilara Vance missing. Julian Croft wasn't just a man, he was an institution. To accuse him would be to accuse the city itself. He found a small, brief article from 6 months ago, a short piece on the city news blog, buried under headlines about a new sports stadium. Local artist's tragic accident. Ilara Vance, a promising painter, had reportedly fallen from a cliffside trail during a solo hike. Her body was never recovered from the turbulent waters below. The article quoted a close friend, Julian Croft, who expressed his profound devastation. She was a brilliant light, Croft was quoted as saying. The world is a darker place without her. The hypocrisy was so profound it was nauseating. He hadn't just killed her, he had curated her memory, writing the final false chapter of her life himself. Leo knew he had to go to the address on the library card. It was a foolish, reckless idea. But the image of the little girl in Sarajevo was superimposed over Ilara's screaming face. He had failed one, he would not fail the other. Ilara's apartment was in a modest 3-story walk-up with a faded blue awning. The air in the hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and old carpets. Apartment to be, he stood before the door for a long moment, his heart hammering. What was he expecting to find? He didn't know. He knocked. The sound was loud in the quiet hall. He waited. Nothing. He knocked again, harder this time. He was about to turn away when he heard the shuffling of feet, the click of a deadbolt. The door opened a crack, held by a brass security chain. An elderly woman with tired, watery eyes peered out at him. Yes. Her voice was thin, reedy. I'm sorry to bother you, Leo said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. I'm looking for Ilara Vance. Does she still live here? The woman's face clouded over. Ilara. Oh honey, no. Ilara's gone, passed away, months ago. A terrible accident. She recited the official story with a practiced sadness. I know, I'm an old friend, Leo lied, the words tasting like ash. I was out of the country. I only just heard. I was hoping to speak to her family, maybe pay my respects. The woman, the landlady, he presumed, seemed to soften. Oh, you poor man. There's no family to speak of. Not that I ever met. She was a quiet girl, kept to herself. Such a shame. She was always so kind. She paused, her eyes drifting to the side. Always paid her rent on time. Not like the new fella. Someone new is living there. Leo asked, trying to keep the urgency out of his voice. Moved? In a month after, some man pays late, if at all. Loud music. The place has gone downhill. She sighed, a sound of weary resignation. An idea, a terrible, desperate idea, began to form in Leo's mind. Listen, he said, lowering his voice. This is going to sound strange, but, Ilara, she borrowed a book from me, a very rare, very valuable book. I know it's a long shot, but is there any chance her things are still? The landlady's eyes lit up at the mention of value. Her things. The man who cleaned out the apartment said to throw it all out. Said it was just junk, but I couldn't. Not all of it. Seemed a shame. I kept a few boxes in the basement storage. Figured someone might come looking one day. Leo's heart leaped. Could I possibly take a look for the book? 10 minutes. Later, he was in a damp, musty basement. The landlady pointing a shaky flashlight beam at 3 cardboard boxes, tucked under a dusty staircase. Here you are, she said. Don't make a mess. She left him alone in the gloom. He pried open the first box. It was full of canvases. Her paintings, they were vibrant, full of life and color. Swirling abstracts, moody cityscapes. He saw the park. From the photograph, he saw the waterfront. He was looking at her world, through her eyes. The second box held her clothes. A simple floral dress. A worn pair of paint-splattered jeans. He lifted a soft cashmere sweater and brought it to his face. It still held her scent. Lavender. He felt like a ghoul, a grave robber. The third box was where he found her. Not her body, but her soul. It was filled with sketchbooks, journals, loose papers. Her handwriting was a wild, expressive scrawl. He sat on the cold concrete floor, the flashlight beam his only companion, and began to read. He read about her dreams of opening a small gallery. He read about her love for the stray cat she fed in the alley behind the building. He read about her loneliness, her struggle to make ends meet. And then, he read about Julian. At first, the entries were breathless, starstruck. Met the most incredible man today. JC, he bought one of my paintings. Said I was a genius. I think I'm floating. Julian had swept into her life like a hurricane. He was her patron, her champion. He showered her with gifts, took her to fancy restaurants, promised her the world. He was her fairy tale. But as Leo read on, the tone began to shift. The ink seemed to darken on the page. Jay is so passionate. Sometimes, it's a little intense. He gets angry when I want to see my friends. He says he's all I need. We had a fight last night. I said I wanted to have my own show, without his help. He got so quiet. It was terrifying. He looked at me like I was a thing he owned, not a person he loved. Then he smiled and apologized and bought me a diamond bracelet. I feel like I'm in a beautiful, golden cage. He has this look, this cold, flat look in his eyes. It comes and goes so fast. I think I imagine it, but I don't. It's real, and it scares me. The final entry was written in a frantic, shaky hand. It was dated the day before her accidental death. He knows I want to leave. I told him I needed some space. He just smiled that smile. That awful, empty smile. He said we were going for a drive, to our special place by the water. To talk things over. He told me to bring my camera. He said he wanted to take some pictures, to remember the good times. Leo's blood turned to ice. He dropped the journal, as if it had burned him. It wasn't an accident. It was a premeditated execution. Julian had made her document her own final hours. The cruelty, the sheer psychopathy of it, was beyond comprehension. He sat there in the darkness of the basement. The weight of Ilara's story settling over him like a shroud. He was no longer just a witness. He was her archivist, her confidant, the keeper of her truth. The photos were the evidence, but the journals were the testimony. He now held the story of the victim, the antagonist, and the hidden witness himself. He was all three, rolled into one. He was the man who had found her last cry for help, the man who knew the monster's name, and the man whose own past demanded he do what he had failed to do before. He had to take Julian down. He didn't know how. He knew it was impossible. But looking at the boxes filled with the fragments of Ilara Vance's stolen life, he knew he was going to die trying. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and grim purpose. Leo felt like he was living in two worlds. In one, he was the proprietor of a dusty pawnshop, haggling over the price of a wedding band with a desperate-looking woman, selling a cheap guitar to a teenager with stars in his eyes. In the other, he was a ghost, moving through the shadows of a conspiracy that was bigger and more terrifying than he could have imagined. Every customer who walked through the door was a potential threat. Every car that slowed down outside his window sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. He started sleeping in the back room again. The negatives and Ilara's journals hidden in a hollowed-out safe behind a loose brick in the wall. The shop was no longer his refuge. It was his bunker. His first move was the most logical, and the most naive. He went to the police. He didn't take the negatives, he wasn't that stupid. He made high-quality prints of the keyframes. The one of Julian's snarling face, the blurry struggle, and a carefully cropped version of the final horrific photo of Ilara, edited to obscure the reflection in her eye. He packaged them with anonymous copies of the most damning pages from her journal, and mailed them to the lead detective on Ilara's case, a man named Sergeant Miller. He waited a week. Nothing happened. No news reports, no calls, nothing. He called the precinct, posing as a journalist from a small out-of-town paper, asking for an update on the Ilara Vance case. He was put on hold for 10 minutes, then transferred to Miller's voicemail. He left a message. No one called back. He knew then, with a sinking certainty, that the rot went deeper. Julian Croft didn't just have money, he had protection. The very people who were supposed to enforce the law were the ones burying his crimes. This realization was a physical blow. The injustice of it was a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. He was completely, utterly alone in this. His next step was to find an ally. Someone who had known Ilara, someone who might have seen the cracks in Julian's perfect facade. Her journals mentioned a friend, a fellow artist named Chloe, who she'd had a falling out with after Julian insisted she cut ties. Leo found her working at a small independent art gallery downtown, a place that smelled of turpentine and fresh coffee. Chloe was a whirlwind of nervous energy, with paint-stained fingers and wary eyes. When Leo mentioned Ilara's name, a wall went up immediately. "I don't know anything," she said, her voice sharp as she turned away to straighten a stack of canvases. "I think you do," Leo said softly. "I've read her journals. She missed you. She was scared." Chloe froze. She turned back to him slowly, her face a mask of grief and fear. "Who are you?" "A friend," he said. It didn't feel like a lie anymore. "I found her camera." That got her attention. He didn't need to say what was on the film. She saw it in his eyes. She led him to a small back office and closed the door. For the next hour, she talked, the words pouring out of her in a torrent of guilt and anger. "I knew he was bad news from the start," she whispered, twisting a paperclip in her hands until it broke. "He was too smooth, too perfect. He isolated her. He convinced her that I was jealous, that her other friends were holding her back. He was a predator, grooming her. I tried to warn her, but she was so in love. She thought he was her savior." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "The last time I saw her, we had a terrible fight. I told her he was dangerous. She told me I was just bitter. She walked away, and I let her go. I should have dragged her away from him." Chloe confirmed his worst fears. Julian was controlling, manipulative, prone to terrifying Flashes of rage that would vanish as quickly as they appeared. She told Leo about an incident at a gallery opening. A man had paid Alara a compliment on her work, and Julian had smiled, shaken the man's hand. And then, later, in the car, had backhanded Alara across the face for embarrassing him by encouraging the attention. The next day, he sent 1,000 white roses to her apartment with a note that said, "My love is a fire, don't play with it." "He's a monster," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "But he owns this city. His money is everywhere. The police, the politicians, they're all on his payroll. You can't touch him." "I have to," Leo said. "I have the pictures." "And he'll crush you for them," she replied, her face pale. "He'll destroy you, and he'll do it with a smile." Chloe's warning proved prophetic. 2 days later, the escalation began. It started small. A rock thrown through his shop window in the middle of the night. He reported it, and the patrol car that showed up took a cursory look, shrugged, and left. The message was clear: "We know it's you, we're watching." Then, his shop was audited. 2 men in cheap suits from the city tax office showed up, announcing a full review of his books, going back 10 years. They spent days turning his life inside out, paralyzing his business, treating him with a cold, bureaucratic contempt that was more unnerving than any open threat. It was a classic power play, designed to bleed him dry and tie him up in red tape. The pressure was immense. He felt Julian's invisible hand tightening around his life, squeezing the air out. He started seeing the same black sedan parked down the street from his shop every day. He was being followed. His phone started making strange clicking noises during calls. He was being listened to. The fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in his stomach. He thought about giving up. He could destroy the negatives, burn the journals, and crawl back into the hole he'd been hiding in for a decade. It would be so easy. No one would blame him. He was a pawnbroker, not a hero. But then he would look at the prince. At Elara's face. He would see the little girl in Sarajevo. He had run once. Running again wasn't an option. It would be a spiritual death sentence. The antagonist, Julian Croft, grew bolder. One evening, as Leo was closing up, a limousine pulled up to the curb. The back window glided down, and there he was. Julian. He looked even more handsome and imposing. In person, he was wearing a tuxedo, on his way to some charity gala, no doubt. He beckoned Leo over with a single manicured finger. Leo's legs felt like lead, but he walked to the car. He felt like a mouse being summoned by a cobra. "Leo Koval," Julian said, his voice smooth as silk. "I've been hearing your name. It seems you've come into possession of some property that belongs to me, a camera, I believe." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He said nothing. "I'm a sentimental man," Julian continued, a faint, chilling smile playing on his lips. "That camera has memories for me. I'd like it back. I'm prepared to be very generous. Let's say $50,000. A fresh start. You could close this sad little shop and go somewhere warm." The offer was a threat wrapped in a bribe. It was a test. "I don't know what you're talking about," Leo said, his voice hoarse. Julian's smile widened, but his eyes turned to chips of ice. "Don't be foolish, Mr. Koval. You're a bug. I'm the windshield. This doesn't have to be a collision. I'm giving you an off-ramp. I suggest you take it." He gestured to the passenger seat. "My associate will handle the transaction." The man in the passenger seat turned. Was Sergeant Miller, the detective Leo had mailed the evidence to. He gave Leo a dead-eyed stare, a slight, contemptuous smirk on his face. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just corruption. It was a partnership. The law wasn't just blind. It was complicit. Leo felt a surge of something hot and reckless. "The camera's not for sale," he said, his voice shaking with a mixture of terror and rage. Julian's smile finally vanished. The mask was off. The cold reptilian thing underneath was visible for a second. "A pity," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I so dislike messes." The window glided up. The limousine pulled away, leaving Leo standing on the sidewalk, his body trembling, the stench of expensive cologne and corruption lingering in the air. He knew what was coming next. The threats would no longer be veiled. The violence would no longer be peripheral. He had been given his final warning. The next time there would be no conversation. He went back inside and locked the door, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key in the lock. He looked around the shop, at the cluttered shelves of other people's discarded lives. He had made his choice. He had refused the affront. He was on a collision course with a monster, and the only weapon he had was a strip of film and the story of a dead woman. The injustice was no longer just about Ilara. It was about the smug, untouchable evil that Julian represented. It was about the corrupt cop in the front seat. It was about a world where the rich and powerful could kill with impunity. He was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and terrified. But he was also, for the first time in a very long time, sure of what he had to do. The conflict had escalated. The battle lines were drawn, and he was standing on the wrong side of the wire, with no backup and no hope of retreat. The week after the limousine visit was a descent into a quiet, suffocating hell. The black sedan was no longer discreet. It was a permanent fixture across the street, a constant, silent reminder of his predicament. Business in the shop dried up to nothing. The few customers who did wander in were transparently not there to buy anything. They were large men with cauliflower ears and dead eyes who would browse for 5 minutes, making him feel their presence, before leaving without a word. It was psychological warfare, designed to fray his nerves and break his will. He felt like a prisoner in his own life. The betrayal by Sergeant Miller had shaken him to his core. The system wasn't just broken. It was a weapon in the hands of men like Croft. There was no one to turn to. Chloe had called him, her voice a panicked whisper. Someone had broken into her apartment. Nothing was stolen, but everything was moved. A teacup placed on the edge of a shelf, a painting hung upside down. It was a message. A warning to her, and through her, to him. We know who you talk to. We can get to anyone. After that, she stopped answering his calls. He was truly, finally alone. He was trapped, circling the drain of his own fear. He spent his nights staring at the prince, at Ilara's face, his anger and his terror warring within him. He was losing. Croft was systematically dismantling his life, isolating him, backing him into a corner from which there was no escape. He needed something more. He needed a weapon that Croft couldn't anticipate, a truth that couldn't be buried by money or intimidation. Answer, when it came, was not from a flash of brilliance, but from a moment of quiet desperation. He was sitting at his workbench, the Minolta X700 in his hands. He'd been cleaning it, a nervous repetitive motion that calmed him. He ran his thumb over the worn metal, thinking of Ilara. This camera was the last thing she had touched. It was the silent witness. He'd been so focused on the film, on the images it contained, that he had overlooked the vessel itself. He turned it over and over in his hands. It was just a machine of metal and glass. But she had trusted it. He told me to bring my camera, she had written. Why? Why would a killer want his victim to document her own murder? It was an act of supreme arrogance, of ultimate power. Croft wanted to possess not just her life, but the very record of her death. An old memory surfaced. A fellow journalist in Beirut, a man who customized his gear for the harsh conditions of the field. He would waterproof his cameras, reinforce the bodies, and sometimes create small hidden compartments for smuggling out film from areas where it would otherwise be confiscated. On a wild, improbable hunch, Leo picked up a set of jeweler's screwdrivers. He was a tinkerer by nature. He knew his way around the guts of old electronics. He started with the base plate. For small screws, he worked carefully, his hands steady for the first time in days. He lifted the plate off. Inside, he saw the expected mechanics, gears, levers, the film transport system. Nothing out of the ordinary. He kept going. He removed the leatherette covering, peeling it back gently. He disassembled the film advance lever. He took apart the top plate, exposing the shutter speed dial and the pentaprism housing. He was deconstructing the last object that connected him to her, and it felt like a desecration. But he couldn't stop. He was driven by a certainty he couldn't explain. It was inside the hand grip, a piece of molded plastic, designed for ergonomics, held on by 2 screws. It seemed solid. He removed it. As he pulled it away from the camera body, he felt a slight, unusual resistance. He looked closer. There was a thin seam along the back of the grip that shouldn't have been there. He inserted the edge of a thin blade into the seam and pried. The plastic backing popped off. His breath caught in his throat. Nestled inside a hollowed-out space, within the grip, was a tiny black object, wrapped in a small piece of electrical tape. It was a micro-SD card. His heart exploded in his chest. This was it. This was her insurance policy, her secret testament. It was so clever, so audacious. Croft, in his arrogance, had taken the camera from her dying hands, believing he possessed the only evidence. He had probably removed the film himself and had it destroyed, or perhaps he'd kept it as a sick trophy. But he had missed this. The real secret wasn't on the film. It was hidden in the body of the camera itself. He felt a surge of triumphant, terrifying energy. He didn't have a computer with a micro SD slot. The shop's ancient desktop was useless. He needed to get to an electronics store, but he couldn't leave. The men in the sedan were still out there. He was a rat in a cage, and he had just found the key. But the guards were watching the door. He waited until the dead of night. Until 3 a.m., when the city was at its quietest. He slipped out the back alley, his face obscured by a hoodie, his body coiled with tension. Every shadow was a threat, every distant sound a potential enemy. He walked for 2 miles, sticking to the darkest streets, before catching a late-night bus to an all-night superstore in the next town over. The fluorescent lights of the store felt like 1,000 interrogations lamps. He bought a cheap laptop and a USB card reader, paying with cash, his face hidden from the security cameras. He didn't go back to the shop. He couldn't risk it. He found a grimy no-tell-motel off the highway, the kind that rented rooms by the hour. He paid for a full night, locked the door, bolted the chain, and wedged a chair under the knob. The room smelled of bleach and despair. He sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the new laptop humming on his lap, and inserted the micro SD card into the reader. A single folder appeared on the screen. It was labeled with a single letter, J. He clicked it open. It contained 3 files. 2 were audio files, 1 was a video. He clicked on the first audio file, his hand trembling as he raised the laptop's volume. The sound of wind, waves crashing. It was the waterfront. Then, her voice, Elara's voice. Clear and steady, but laced with an undercurrent of fear. "My name is Elara Vance," she said. "If you are listening to this, it means I'm dead. And it means Julian Croft killed me. He brought me here, to our spot. He thinks this is a reconciliation, a final date. But I saw the look in his eyes. He's going to kill me. I don't know how, or when. But it will happen tonight. He's a monster. He's a monster who looks like a prince. He told me he loved me, and he hit me. He told me he'd make me famous, and he locked me in a cage. Oh God." Her voice broke for a moment. "He's coming back. I have to go." The recording stopped. Leo felt tears welling in his eyes. He was listening to a message from a ghost. A final, desperate act of defiance. He clicked on the second audio file. It was much longer. It started with the same sounds of the waterfront. Then, their voices. Julian and Elara. "Just one more picture, my love," Julian's voice crooned. It was the voice from the society pages, smooth and charming. "For old time's sake, I don't want to, Julian," Elara said, her voice small. "Don't be difficult. Smile for me." There was a pause, then, a click. The sound of the camera's shutter. The sound of frame 35 being taken. And then, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. "There," Julian's voice said. Now flat and cold, utterly devoid of warmth. Perfect. The look of a terrified little bitch. "It's your best work. Julian, what are you doing?" Elara's voice was a choked whisper. "What I should have done the moment. You thought you could walk away from me, he snarled. The change was monstrous. Did you really think you could leave? Me, Julian Croft. You are nothing. You are a thing I bought, a pretty little pet, and now you're broken, so I'm throwing you away. There was the sound of a struggle, a gasp from Alara. You know what I love most about this spot? Julian's voice was calm now, conversational, which was somehow more terrifying. The acoustics are terrible. No one can hear you scream. There was a thud, a choked cry, and the best part, the voice continued, laced with a chilling, philosophical cruelty, is that they'll find my DNA all over you, and it won't matter, because I'll be the one grieving for you on the evening news. I'll be the one funding the search party that never finds you. I'll be the one who writes your ending. You don't get to have a story without me. You don't even get to die without my permission. The recording captured the sound of a body being dragged, the sickening scrape of fabric on rock, and then a splash, a heavy, final splash, followed by silence. A long, profound silence, broken only by the sound of the waves, and then one last sound. Julian Croft, alone in the darkness, begins to softly whistle a jaunty, cheerful tune. The audio file ended. Leo was rigid, his body locked in a state of shock. He had just listened to a murder, the full, unedited soundtrack. The plot twist wasn't just that there was a recording, it was the sheer, unadulterated evil it contained. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a dissertation on psychopathy. He finally clicked on the video file. The screen flickered to life. It was a selfie video, shot in what looked like a car. It was Sergeant Miller. He was looking into the camera, a smug look on his face. "All right, Mr. Croft," Miller said, as if leaving a report. "Package is in the mail." The anonymous tip about the Vance girl. Photos, some diary pages. Pathetic. "Don't worry, it's been filed in the circular cabinet, it's gone." The Koval situation. "He's a nobody. We're leaning on him, he'll break. Consider it handled." He then held up a thick, white envelope stuffed with cash. "And thank you for your continued support of the Policemen's Benevolent Association. Your generosity is, as always, greatly appreciated." He gave a wink, and the video ended. The conspiracy was laid bare. It was a clean, simple, business transaction. Justice, traded for an envelope of cash. Leo felt a wave of nausea. The stakes had just shifted seismically. This was no longer about getting justice for one woman. It was about tearing down a corrupt system that allowed monsters like Croft to flourish. A system protected by men like Miller. He now held the bombshell. The irrefutable proof, but it also made him the most dangerous man in the city, to Croft. And his allies, they weren't just trying to silence him anymore, they would be trying to kill him. He couldn't go to the press, not the mainstream ones. Croft's influence was too deep. He couldn't go to the feds. It would get bogged down in bureaucracy and leaks. He had to go over their heads, all of them. He needed a stage so big, so public, that the truth, once revealed, would be unstoppable. He looked at the cheap laptop, at the files that held the power to burn down an empire. The tension was at its absolute peak. He had the weapon, now he had to figure out how to detonate it. In the heart of the enemy's camp, without getting killed in the process, the game had changed. It was no longer about survival. It was about righteous, explosive, public annihilation. The plan formed in the stale, sleepless air of the motel room. It was audacious, reckless, and likely suicidal. But it was the only way. Croft had used his public image as a shield. Leo would turn it into a weapon. He would use the monster's own stage to expose him. He spent the next 2 days glued to the laptop, fueled by vending machine coffee and a burning, righteous fury. He researched Julian Croft's schedule, his public appearances, his entire life, and then he found it. The perfect stage. In 1 week, the Croft Foundation was hosting its annual Beacon of Hope charity gala. It was the city's premier society event, a self-congratulatory spectacle where the wealthy and powerful gathered to celebrate their own benevolence. The mayor would be there, the police chief would be there. The media would be there, broadcasting the event live. Julian Croft himself would be the keynote speaker, delivering a speech on civic virtue and compassion. The hypocrisy was so staggering. It was poetic. It was the perfect target-rich environment. Leo's old life, the one he had tried so hard to bury, came rushing back. He wasn't just a pawnbroker, he had been a damn good photojournalist. He knew how to work crowds, how to gain access, how to use technology to his advantage. He spent the last of his savings on a new set of clothes, a decent suit that made him look like he belonged. He bought a high-end wireless audio transmitter and a miniature, wide-angle lens camera, the kind used in covert surveillance. He bought a press pass from a contact he hadn't spoken to in a decade, a man who owed him a favor and was willing to trade it for a few $100s. No questions asked. The day of the gala, Leo felt a strange, unnerving calm settle over him. It was the calm he used to feel before walking into a riot, the zen-like focus that comes when the stakes are absolute. He was a ghost walking toward his own destiny. He had backed up the files from the microSD card onto a dozen different cloud servers, and he'd mailed a copy to a trusted international news agency with a time-delayed release, set for midnight. If he didn't stop it, the story would break whether he succeeded or not. It was his dead man switch. He arrived at the venue, a grand ballroom in a historic hotel, and blended into the throng of journalists and photographers near the entrance. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the murmur of powerful people making powerful small talk. He saw them all. The mayor, laughing too loudly. The police chief, his face florid, accepting congratulations for the city's falling crime rate. And he saw Sergeant Miller, standing near the entrance, his eyes scanning the crowd. A loyal dog guarding his master's gate. Leo kept his head down, his press pass visible, and slipped inside with a group of cameramen. The ballroom was a sea of glittering diamonds and black ties. Chandeliers dripped crystals from the ceiling. A string quartet played softly in the corner. It was a world away from his dusty shop. A universe away from Alara's lonely, terrified end. The contrast fueled his resolve. He found his target. The main audio-visual control booth at the back of the room. It was a small, elevated space with a clear view of the stage. He'd studied the hotel schematics online. He knew the system they used. He waited for the technician to step out for a cigarette break. Then, using a set of lockpicker skill acquired in his more adventurous youth, he slipped inside. He had 10 minutes. Maybe less. His hands moved with practiced speed. He plugged his laptop into the main mixing board. He bypassed the primary video feed, routing it through his own machine. He uploaded the audio file The Murder into the sound system's playlist, disguising it as a piece of ambient music. He embedded the video of Sergeant Miller into the presentation slideshow that would play on the two massive screens flanking the stage. It was a digital time bomb, and he had just set the timer. He slipped out of the booth moments before the technician returned. Melting back into the crowd, he found a position near the stage, his small camera hidden in his hand, and he waited. An hour later, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed. The master of ceremonies walked on stage and, after a fawning introduction, welcomed the city's greatest benefactor, Mr. Julian Croft. The room erupted in applause. Julian walked into the spotlight, waving to the crowd, soaking in their adoration. He was the picture of grace and success. He approached the podium, his handsome face projected onto the giant screens. He smiled, a warm, benevolent smile that Leo knew was a lie. "Thank you," Julian began, his voice resonating through the ballroom. "Thank you for your generosity, for your belief in a better tomorrow. Tonight, we celebrate the spirit of community, the power of compassion." As he spoke, Leo, from his position in the crowd, pressed a key on a small remote in his pocket. On the screens, the logo of the Croft Foundation flickered. For a split second, it was replaced by the video of Sergeant Miller in his car. It was so fast, most people missed it. But Julian saw it. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance, crossed his face. He faltered for a second, then continued. "The power to lift up those who have fallen," he said, his voice a little tighter. Leo pressed the key again. This time, the video of Miller stayed on the screen for a full second, his smug face clearly visible before it cut back to Julian. A murmur went through the crowd. Julian stopped, his eyes darting to the control booth at the back of the room. His smile was gone. "We seem to be having some technical difficulties," he said, forcing a laugh, and then Leo held down the button. On the two massive screens, the video of Sergeant Miller played, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "All right, Mr. Croft. Package is in the mail. The Vance girl, it's gone." The crowd gasped. People were pulling out their phones, recording. Miller, standing near the door, turned white as a sheet. Julian's face was a mask of fury. "Turn it off," he hissed into the microphone. "Turn that off now," but it was too late. The video continued. "And thank you for your continued support of the Policemen's Benevolent Association." The image of the envelope full of cash filled the screens. Panic began to ripple through the room. The mayor was on his feet, his face slack with shock. The police chief was frozen in horror. Then, Leo activated the final phase. He triggered the audio file. The video of Miller vanished, replaced by a tight shot of Julian's own enraged face. And from the speakers, the sound of the wind and the waves filled the room. Then, Ilara's voice, a ghostly whisper from beyond the grave. "My name is Ilara Vance. If you are listening to this, it means I'm dead. And it means Julian Croft killed me." A collective scream went through the ballroom. It was a sound of pure, horrified shock. Julian stood paralyzed at the podium, his face contorted in a silent scream of his own, a mirror of the photograph Leo had found. The audio played on, relentless, inescapable. His cold, cruel words, his snarling confession. The sound of the struggle, the thud, the splash dot, and then, the most damning sound of all, the cheerful, jaunty whistling. The whistling echoed through the dead silent ballroom. No one moved, no one breathed. They were all held captive by the sound of a monster celebrating his own evil. In that moment of perfect horrified silence, Leo raised his own camera. He pushed through the stunned crowd until he was standing right in front of the stage. He pointed his lens at Julian Croft, and on the two giant screens, Leo projected the final, terrible image. Frame 35. The suffocating close-up of Elara's face, her mouth open in a silent scream, her eyes wide with absolute terror, and reflected in those eyes, the tiny distorted image of a smiling Julian. The raw, undeniable truth, broadcast for the entire world to see. The public cinematic exposure was complete. It was a courtroom bombshell delivered in a ballroom. A scandal breaking not just the internet but the city's very soul. Chaos erupted. People were screaming, running for the doors. The live news cameras, which had been broadcasting the whole thing, zoomed in on Julian's face, then on the horrific image on the screen. Two uniformed officers, their faces pale and resolute, pushed through the pandemonium. They weren't from the city force. They were state troopers, called in by the news agency Leo had contacted. They walked onto the stage, past the paralyzed mayor, and approached the podium. Julian Croft, the untouchable titan, the beacon of hope, just stood there. Broken, exposed. His empire of lies crumbling around him in real time. He looked from the image of his victim to the face of Leo, who stood 10 feet away, his camera still raised, a silent, avenging angel. The officers put their hands on him. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the only sound Leo could hear over the ringing in his ears. It was the sound of justice. Explosive, shocking, and emotionally cathartic. He had done it. He had given Elara her voice back. He had made them all listen. He lowered his camera, the weight of it suddenly feeling immense, and watched as they led the monster away. The aftermath was a quiet storm. The city didn't just reel, it fractured. The Croft scandal became a national obsession. A sordid viral saga of power, corruption, and murder. The video from the gala played on a continuous loop on every news channel. Julian Croft's face, juxtaposed with Ilara's, became an iconic image of predatory evil. The audio of his confession was the subject of 1,000 podcasts, his chilling whistle a meme for unadulterated psychopathy. The dominoes fell with breathtaking speed. Sergeant Miller was arrested the same night, caught trying to flee the state. His confession implicated the police chief and a half-dozen other high-ranking officers. The mayor, tainted by his association with Croft, resigned in disgrace. The Croft Foundation collapsed, its assets frozen, its name now synonymous with a lie. The beautiful, glittering facade of the city had been ripped away. Revealing the rot and decay beneath. Leo became an unwilling celebrity. His face was on the cover of magazines, the man who had single-handedly brought down an empire. They called him a hero, a crusader. They didn't understand. He wasn't a hero. He was a man paying a debt. The media hounded him, camped outside his shop, offered him millions for his story, for the rights to the photos, for the camera itself. He refused them all. He boarded up the broken front window of his pawn shop and didn't open the door. He gave the police the original negatives, journals, and the micro SD card. He gave his testimony in a quiet room, his voice flat and unemotional as he recounted the story from the beginning. He didn't want fame or money. He just wanted it to be over. The trial was a formality. With the audio confession, Julian Croft had no defense. He sat in the courtroom, a hollowed-out version of his former self, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. He never looked at Leo. He never showed a flicker of remorse. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, as much as the legal system could provide it, had been served. But for Leo, there was no sense of victory. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. He had won. He had avenged LRR, he had faced down his own demons, and, this time, he had not run. But the cost was a part of his own soul. He had waded into the darkness to expose a monster, and some of that darkness had clung to him. Months later, when the media frenzy had finally died down and moved on to the next scandal, he received a letter. It was from a woman who introduced herself as LRR's older sister. She had been estranged from the family for years and had only learned of her sister's true fate from the news. She thanked Leo for what he had done, for giving her sister the truth she deserved. She told him that with some of the money from the victims' compensation fund, she had given Alara a proper burial. A week later, Leo drove to the cemetery she had named. It was a quiet, green place on a hill overlooking the city. He found the grave easily. It was a simple stone of white marble. Ilara Vance, artist, dreamer, beloved sister. Her light will not be extinguished. He stood there for a long time, the wind rustling the leaves of the trees overhead. He had brought something with him, the Minolta X700. He had cleaned it meticulously, restoring it to the condition it was in when he first found it. It felt wrong to sell it. It felt wrong to keep it. It belonged here, with her. He gently placed the camera at the base of the headstone. A final, silent tribute. The instrument of her death, and the vessel of her justice. As he turned to leave, he saw a woman approaching. She had the same crooked smile he recognized from the photographs. Ilara's sister. They didn't say much. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said by the tragedy that connected them. They just stood together in a shared, quiet grief. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave her back her name. She gave me back mine," Leo replied. The words feeling truer than anything he had said in years. He walked away from the grave. From the camera. From the final chapter of Alara Vance's story. He didn't look back. He got in his car and drove, not to the pawn shop, but to the waterfront. The place where she had died. He stood on the cliffs, the wind whipping at his coat, and looked out at the water. For the first time in a decade, he didn't feel the weight of the little girl's hand he never took. He felt the weight of the one he had, metaphorically, taken. He had carried Ellora's story to the finish line. The guilt that had haunted him for so long had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer a ghost that paralyzed him, but a scar that reminded him of the cost of looking away. He reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out his own camera. The old Leica he hadn't touched since Sarajevo. It felt heavy and unfamiliar. In his hands, he raised it to his eye and looked through the viewfinder. He saw the grey water, the distant skyline, the gulls circling overhead. He didn't take a picture, not yet. But he was looking again. He was seeing the world again. The healing was bittersweet. The silence of the pawnshop, now a choice rather than a prison. The lingering emotional echo was not one of triumph, but of a profound, haunting quiet. The truth had a price, and he would carry the receipt for the rest of his life.